Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
We wanted to do two things. We wanted to figure out how you could study one of these things live and, keep them safe. And we wanted to change the public perception of, Jaws, right? You talk about sharks being an apex predator of the ocean. What happens when, they're over harvested and start to decline in population, right? It's any ecosystem. Other things thrive and that can have a negative benefit and all these things.
That was Matt Shilling shedding some light on shark recovery work, sharks, the Wind River, and sustainability today on the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by the show. Time for a little travel time check. Before we get started, I just want to remind you, wetflyswing.com/travel time is a great way to enter and find a spot to potentially be a co-host on this show or make a trip with me, win a trip with me to a local trip near your home. That's wetflyswing.com/travel time. Today's episode is sponsored by Lake Lady Rods, building distinctive custom rods, each created one at a time to the exact specifications for each angler. Lake Lady only uses world-class top-of-the-line components and products. And Chris is doing some good stuff over there. I've been using one of his custom 4-weights this year, and it's been really a great casting rod. If you can, check out Lake Lady right now, wetflyswing.com/Lake Lady, LakeLady. Matt Shilling walks us through the nonprofit Indifly and what they are doing to create sustainable local fly fishing operations. We find out where in the world they first got started in South America, why they are now focusing on the Wind River Reservation, and some of the challenges to giving Indigenous people the skills to run their own businesses in this space. We're also sponsored by Jackson Hole Fly Company, a new kind of fly shop designing and manufacturing their own high-quality fly rods, reels, and gear, and over 1,000 fly patterns. Right now, you can get 25% off your first order. You can head over to jhflyco.com/swing to get started right now. That's jhflyco.com/swing. You support this podcast by clicking over through that link to Jackson. Some really cool stories in this one, including one about a group of 11-year-old kids who are basically running this conservation movement that they put together in South America. Really amazing story. So without further ado, here he is, Matt Shilling from Indifly.org. How's it going, Matt?
Good, man. How are you? Appreciate the opportunity, Dave.
Yeah. Thanks for taking a little time today to dig into Indifly. It's a name that I've been hearing quite a bit. Oliver White. I can't remember when we had him on. It's been a number of years now, but I'm pretty sure he brought this up. We're going to dig into the background of Indifly, the great work you guys are doing with this program, and then we're gonna eventually get there. But talk about how you first got into fly fishing. Then we'll start there.
Yeah, I had a probably a dissimilar introduction to the sport than most. So I started a little bit later in life, probably when I was mid-20s. I was completely burned out what I was doing at the time, kind of took a little career change and reverse course, wanted to add value to the world still. But so I started a different nonprofit with a buddy who was a big fly angler. He had a freestone river that, in Utah, that was an amazing trout fishery. And I really learned there, how to do the basics. And then I probably made a mistake and I started doing saltwater trips a little too early. And so, I didn't really have the skill set to do those saltwater trips, but it was part of, what I wanted to do and how I wanted to serve. And it kind of all went back into it. And so, definitely made some mistakes along the way, but I really enjoy it. I'm a true believer that there's something about standing in a river or a body of water that's therapeutic and healing. So I'm a big fan. Nice.
And how did you, we talked a little, like I said, back when Oliver White was on, I'll put a link in the show notes to that episode, but how did you connect with the Indifly?
Yeah. So we started Indifly in 2014, and it was really out of a project that was led by Costa Sunglasses. So Costa had a pro at the time who was doing a birding trip to this little village in South America. Guyana is the country. And he went down there and kind of fell in love with people. And he went back to Costa and said, look, they need some help. I'm not quite sure what you can do, but if there's an opportunity, you should take a look. And Costa at the time said, yeah, we're all in. And so they put together a team. I was thankful to be part of that team. And we kind of went down and figured out how we could help this community protect their resources. It's a community of about 294 people, and all their peers had taken the stance of, look, we don't want to do this, but we've shifted from the barter economy, and the way that we can make money the easiest is exploitation of resources. And this little village, it's called Rewa, kind of took a stand and said, look, we don't want to do that. But we need help, right? And so what they do have is this very special fish called an arapaima. And for most fly anglers, it will be the largest fish that they catch on the fly. And so we've needed to figure out, one, is it legally, can we do this? Is it a viable destination? Will people come? Three, and most important, is how do you catch this thing? And so, fast forward a little bit, we figured most of those things out. And then we had this model that we thought we could replicate around the world, and that there was a need for it. And while the world certainly didn't need another nonprofit, nobody was doing what we were doing. So we stood up Indifly out of that.
That's right. And arapaima is a great, we've talked about that a little bit on the podcast here, and it's pretty unique. Yeah, it's a gigantic fish and very cool. So that's how it started. Basically, Costa was kind of leading things, and Roy, you got down there, and so at that time when Indifly started, arapaima wasn't really, people weren't fishing for it that much.
Well, they weren't fishing for it as we talk about fishing. They were fishing for it to feed families. And at one point down there, it was almost extinct, and then they put protections around it. What's a little bit unique about this interior of Guyana and all the villages that are there is that they're politically and legally very protected. So there's a law in Guyana called the Amerindian Act, and it outlines what people can and cannot do within these communities, and really as the protection for the communities. So we had to get permission, obviously, from their federal government, so to speak, to go and work with these communities. But also there was somewhat vague, interpretation of the protection around arapaima at the time, and so to target the species was a question which we obviously got figured out. But in the beginning, basically they said, well, we can't catch these things, period. We're obviously, every project that we do is catch and release. So, obviously we're not killing them and feeding them to people. But at one point they were heavily targeted. You think about a 200 to 300 pound fish that feeds a lot of people, right? And so they were just putting nets in the middle of the river and wiping out as many as they can. So
that's it. So you go in here, in this example, you teach. I mean, basically the model is you help. Well, maybe you could describe how the Indifly works, because it's about letting them basically take the lead, right, on these guiding programs.
That's right. Yeah. So, we help Indigenous communities protect the remaining pristine places in the world. So the vehicle that we use to do that is often fly fishing, or all of it fly fishing at the moment. And so we, enable Indigenous communities to own and operate fly fishing ecotourism businesses. And one of the things that sets Indifly apart, and really the only way that the model works in our eyes, is that these are 100% community owned and operated businesses. We don't take a stake. There's nobody else that has a stake. All benefit goes to the community. And at the end of the day, what these businesses provide are sustainable livelihoods, jobs, right? They generate community-wide economic benefits. And we can go into a little bit more of that as we talk about specific projects. And then, lastly, but not of lesser importance, is they create incentives for the protection of homelands. We aren't the organization that goes in and says, here's a bunch of money for the protection of your resources. You should figure that out. Here's what we think is best. And then kind of go away. We take this long-term approach to provide an economic incentive for, community-led protection of resources, if that makes sense. And like just going down and talking about REWA a little bit more in the beginning, look, I naively expected loincloths and spears. You're in the middle of the Amazon basin. And what I got was Ed Hardy t-shirts. And what happens there is that during the dry season, so rainy season to dry season, the water moves 40 feet vertically, right? So during the rainy season, the jungle floods, so to speak, which helps these arapaima move from the river to these ponds, and then it recedes, and then you can target the fish in the ponds. But during the dry season, the community has lots of visitors. Many of those visitors come and give gifts that are tied to some point of business deal. So timber rights, mineral rights. You obviously have a ton of timber. You're in the rainforest, but the other thing is bauxite, gold, diamond. They're just a plethora of resources that each community owns. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people coming in and saying, here's a new what's a good example? Here's a new motorbike for the Two Shower Chief's family. Can you sign here and give us timber rights for, X amount of land? So, my point is that they'd shifted from the barter economy a long time ago. And a lot of these men in the community, especially, were going off for months at a time and working in mining camps because they had to, provide for their families on a currency basis. And so, they would go work in a mining camp, say, and they would come back and, basically they're breaking even. They have to pay for travel and lodging and food while they're there. And they come back with a little bit of money in their pocket, but it didn't really move the needle. And now, you fast forward quite a few years, all those men, stay in the village and work at the Eco Lodge and, make more money than they did before. So, that's just a little brief history. You can go into more if you'd like. But
yeah, that's how it works. And so I'm curious, and you might not know the answer to this, but it seems interesting because, and I don't know, Guyana, basically we're talking about, if you look on a map and, there's obviously places we'll talk more about where you're working, but kind of South America. And so what are, like the timber rights? If you go to a local group and say, hey, sign this, do the local people actually, how does that work? Because do they own the rights to that, or is there a government or what's going on? Just give us a little brag, because I don't know how the government, that process works.
Yeah, it's really interesting there. Again, back to the Amérindian Act. So each village does own their own land. And so there's a couple things there. One, obviously, they have some autonomy in what they can do with that to a point. But it also allows them for or the opportunity to expand their land holdings based on a business justification. So with REWA's example, it kind of got held up over the COVID period. But, they have applied for an extension of their land holdings. So, doubling its size, basically, on the justification of this sport fishing business now, right? So in theory, people going down and fishing REWA are helping to protect and keep pristine a pretty large section of rainforest, right? That's at risk. And that's just something, you like the average angler, even, we didn't think of in the beginning, right? But it's also a unique situation there.
That's what I was going to say. So yeah, if you look at other places, is it similar? Maybe we can talk about that. So how many places around, and are you guys kind of around the globe? Talk about that, the other areas you're in.
Yeah. So, in the beginning, we started with REWA and arapaima. And when you look to scale something like this, you want to do it in a few ways, right? You want to scale geographically, and you want to scale from a species diversity standpoint. And so what we did was we kind of looked around the world and said, all right, what's the opposite of this offering, right? We want to appeal to as many anglers as possible. So, we have this really cool immersive jungle experience, that's really big fish. And so we looked at a place in French Polynesia called, well, I'll just leave the name of the island out, but it didn't really have a community. And we're that's our mission is, helping communities. And so, what we did like about French Polynesia, and most people know Tahiti or Bora Bora, right? But there's 118 plus islands and atolls in French Polynesia. Obviously, not all inhabited, but in theory, if you can make this model work in one place, it's easily scalable to other places within the country. And so we found this little atoll called Ana. And it's an amazing place, straight out of a postcard. But it's flats fishery, bonefish, giant trevally. Oddly, a pretty big population of Napoleon wrasse, and all the other species that you would find around the reef. And that one kind of took a turn too, which was, I have this very vivid memory on a first trip there. We were sitting in someone's driveway, just talking, and someone asked the question just out of a driver of, so what's your favorite fish to eat here? Obviously, you eat a lot of fish. And everybody almost at the same time said bonefish. And odd to hear, right? You don't hear that in a lot of places, number one. But number two, we kind of looked at each other and like, oh, okay, this is going to be a primary targeted species. Maybe we should figure out, how sustainable this fishery is. And so, we sent a scientist there with some partners that lived there for 3 years, and his whole job was to figure out the state of the bonefish fishery. And come to find out, it was in collapse. And fast forward. It's a unique community. So, you have this lagoon in the middle, and they've built these ancestral traps. And unlike many atolls, tidal inflow is almost minimal there. So there's one place that bonefish can go out to spawn in the open ocean. And of course, that's where all the traps are, right? So, the community has built these traps, and bonefish aggregate, move out, and if they go right, they get caught in the trap, and if they go left, they go out to spawn, right? So you're talking about killing thousands of bonefish at a time, and just over the years, that has an impact. And so, we kind of took the data around to the community and got a little bit of pushback in the beginning, to be honest with you. The older generation was, look, this is culturally significant to us, which it is. They actually ship a lot of bonefish off the island, to family in Tahiti. But the kids were like, look, this needs to be something done. There needs to be something done about this. So, and we had gotten them like a drone so they could go out and do fish counts and a software program to help with that. And they petitioned the government to create this marine education area, which we would refer to as a marine protected area, which is close to the spawning aggregation, but they would go out there every day and, learn. And one of the unique things about these kids is that they're all age 11 and under. So in their system of education, in French Polynesia, typically, you only live on your home island for school until age 11. And then at that point, you go to a different island or atoll, depending upon where you live, to what we would kind of refer to as middle school. And then eventually you end up in the capital, Papeete, which is on Tahiti, for high school. And, when you think about going back to a community with zero jobs that's largely subsisting off of an economy based around a coconut tree, or you get a job in a restaurant based in a tourism economy and help your family back on that island or atoll, it's a tough decision. So my point is, when we're talking about these kids that led this conservation effort, you're talking about 11 and under, which is amazing. And so, eventually, fast forward, they continued to look at the data and they said, all right, we want to make sure that there are bonefish around for us when we're grandparents, so to speak. And they went around door to door in the community and asked their uncles, aunts, grandpas, grandmas to start making decisions for them and not necessarily for themselves. And they got this thing called a Rahui passed, which is a Polynesian cultural moratorium on harvest, basically, right? So So for 5 years during the spawn, they committed, everyone in the community committed to leaving the bonefish alone and not harvesting them, which is a big shift in mindset for conservation there. And again, led by these kids. So I'm kind of rambling on about that, but that one took a turn that we didn't expect, right? And I guess my point is when we go into these communities, we let the science guide us for sure. The last thing we want to do is walk into a community and invite people there to apply pressure to a resource that can't handle it. So we're very driven by science in the beginning, again, because, you don't have a business if nobody catches fish when they come down.
Today's episode is sponsored by Fairflies, founded with the idea of finding ethical solutions to fly tying materials and products. They've done just that by creating jobs for marginalized groups, both in the U.S. and abroad. I connected with Jeff quite a number of years ago, and we've been keeping in touch here, so it's great to be sharing this amazing message and story that Jeff has put together. We've had him on an episode already, and he shared some of that story. 5D brushes make fly tying fast and enjoyable for all skill levels. Fairflies has replaced craft fur with their own fly fur, a product made by fly tyers for fly tyers. Now they also are running the show at Wasatch Custom Angling Tools and bringing on a bunch of new high quality tools. They have over 50 tools right now, and something for every fly tyer. A true do-it-yourself company helping you tie better flies faster. Head over to wetflyswing.com/fairflies right now. That's FAIRFLIES. You support this podcast by clicking over through that link. Okay, back to the show. It sounds like here fishing, right? Exploitation is a big part, but how does also you factor in some of these bigger things, right? Because we have obviously things maybe we don't have as much control over, but climate change, other things that are going on out there. Do you guys factor that into the mix where you're like, because we see this in other areas, right, with like steelhead populations where, things are going down just partly because of, ocean conditions. Do you guys see that also? I'm not as familiar with some of these areas out here.
Yeah, a fair bit. And, that's always something that we take into account. We're trying to create generational change, and often that comes with generational businesses, right? So when you talk about that type of time horizon, you have to take those things into account. I think about this a lot, and we get asked this question, but I'm sure listeners right now may be asking themselves, look, there's a lot of global issues on the forefront today. Why do you guys focus on Indigenous communities? And the answer for us is pretty simple. The Indigenous communities are custodians of 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. If you want to target a population and help them protect the world, the remaining biodiversity, this is the population that lives in that biodiversity, right? They are the custodians. So, in my thought process, everyone who cares about climate change or cares about, making sure that their family has a place to live for generations, taking care of our home, should be doing everything they can to help Indigenous communities protect it, because they're the custodians. And we kind of got off, the path of, scaling to projects or, what other projects we have. So let's jump back there for a minute. So we've figured out Anna, after some time, which, is a really cool destination culturally and from, a fishing standpoint. And then, kind of all along the way, we wanted to do something domestically, almost from day one, look, we can do this all over the world, but there's also a need here domestically. And so we started looking at, Native American reservations, and we spent some time on quite a few, and we ended up, partnering with the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho of the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. So you're central Wyoming, about equidistance from Jackson and Cody and Casper, if you will. In the middle of the state, and it's 2.3 million acres of largely untouched, beauty. You have thousands of miles of streams and 250 some odd lakes, and a lot of these are high alpine stocked golden trout lakes, right? I mean, the world record golden trout it comes from this area. And so, amazing resources, but you have a few issues there. One, very simple, is enforcement. You have, again, 2.3 million acres. You have a fish and game office filled with 5 people. 3 of them are wardens, right? So at any given time, one warden is covering 1 million acres. Impossible job. You have a lot of pressure there. But you also have, 80% unemployment and, substance abuse problems and, kind of all of the issues that you read about or hear about in the news on a reservation. Unfortunately, they all exist there. Part of those issues, if you talk to the experts, stem around solving the unemployment problem. Well, how do you do that in a community like Wind River? Well, you figure out how to sustainably utilize what they have, and that's these amazing resources, right? And so, we thought we could figure it out, but we wanted to do it right. So we basically went there and spent 4 years just kind of hanging out and building trust. And the reason, it may seem a little bit crazy, but like when we go into projects, we're super sensitive to the history of other people coming in and like trying to solve problems and disappearing. The level of skepticism, rightfully so, is super high in a lot of these communities. And so our approach is a little bit different in that we're trying to create these generational changes. So if it takes us like 4 or 5 years to get to a point where we say, hey, can we help you do this? That's fine. And, you can do other things. You're obviously assessing viability during that time. You're doing all those things, but none of this works if the relationship isn't built on trust. Yeah. So, again, being in it for the long game, we wanted to learn as much as we can about their culture and each tribe and, developing relationships and doing all that. But fast forward. So, a few years later, we went in front of the Intertribal Council. So a little unique thing about this reservation is there are 2 tribes. Typically or historically, these tribes have been arch enemies throughout their entire existence. So there's still some of that today, if you can imagine. But on these big initiatives that impact the reservation, they have what's called the Intertribal Council. So it's basically each business council comes together, and we presented a plan in front of them that really focused on, a youth awareness about the environment and, incorporating the value of their culture taught by elders. How do you provide sustainable opportunities for kids to stay on the reservation in a healthy way? Developing strong conservation ethics, protecting their largest asset, right, which is the land, and promoting healthy opportunities to avoid addiction, but also raising the awareness of the reservation as an outdoor destination. For us, like, one of the first things we did there was we took a bunch of kids camping, right? And we kind of naively, again, expected to learn a lot about their culture and history and family life and all these things. Well, come to find out, like, the place that we were there, and in 2.3 million acres, there are a lot of places to camp. We're relatively close to the highway. Nobody had ever been there. None of the kids. And, I guess with the exception of one. And what we quickly found out was, these kids are facing a lot of the challenges that every other kid faces, which is, dependency on screens and pressures of school and family life and all those things. But everything there is just elevated. A lot of these kids are being raised by their grandparents, because the time of their parents was troubling on the reservation. And that brings its own challenges, right? You think about access, right? As their grandparents age, they just aren't physically able to take them out. You have 20 or 80% unemployment, like, not a lot of people can afford a car. So the ability to get around is diminished. And so anyway, point being is, we kind of said, all right, let's take a step back and make sure that the future stewards here have what they need to, ensure that these resources remain pristine. And so we're really focused in the beginning on youth engagement. And then, just one quick thing, and then I'm going to stop talking for a minute.
Yeah.
We, when you look at the model of Indifly, it can be complex and long, and just the time that it takes to get from initiation to launching even a project as a destination can be years, right? It's costly, all of these things, and we wanted a way to make a little bit more of an immediate impact, and so we launched this social impact initiative, to where we go in communities that are doing, utilizing the resources in a sustainable way through ecotourism. That sometimes is partnering with an outfitter, or like the first one we did was with African Waters, who does a really good job of ensuring that when they say we make an impact in the community, they're actually making an impact in the community. This little village in it's called Mahangwa in Lesotho, Africa. So if you look at a map, it's the little landlocked country within South Africa. Had never had power before. For years, the government was saying, oh, we're going to go downriver and install power for you, and it just never happened. Finally, we were like, look, let's just make it happen. And so, it was really led by Keith and the African Water crew, and Johan on our team. But, we were able to go in and install solar in, 56 houses, I think is what it ended up being, and give these people a basic need for the very first time in their life. And things like that don't cost a lot of money compared to these larger projects, have a really, really deep impact on the day-to-day life of the people in these communities. So, we're doing a fair bit amount of that as well.
So it sounds like it's fairly diverse. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the Wind River. That was a question I had because, yeah, I mean, there's obviously that's a big challenge, and I know you guys do a lot of work, obviously around the world. But it sounds like it's pretty diverse. So it's not just about bringing in and teaching, guides how to guide. Like this Wind River example is bigger than that. And are you in this situation? Is that a plan where you're going to be teaching them how to kind of not only protect their natural resources, but provide a guiding program, or is that more through you bring in third party groups to help with that?
No, that's correct. We're actually just moving into that phase. So, look, we, in the beginning of Wind River, we met with every stakeholder we could, and one group that we met with was the school administrators. And oddly enough, for being a small community, there's a lot of schools there, and outstandingly, the common theme was, look, basketball is king on this reservation. And if you don't play basketball, there's nothing healthy for you to do after school, and you go and get in trouble. And so we were like, this is great, natural, something we can fix. Let's stand up outdoor clubs, fly fishing clubs, after school. And the unique thing about where the reservation is locally is that there's a bunch of teachers who moved to that area specifically and took jobs because of the outdoor opportunities, right? You're just in outdoor mecca world there. And so, it was pretty easy to find some teachers who would volunteer their time after school to stand up fly fishing clubs. And so that's one of the things we did. And it's all about, creating this introduction and interest and spark for what we would call, a spark for conservation. And, you fall in love with outdoors, so then you want to protect it, right? And so, we've done that, and we've set up some other programs, and right before COVID, we launched the pilot of Native Guide Academy. So, the whole opportunity, or the whole point here, is to create opportunities for these kids, in this case, to move into a job that is sustainable. And, in this case, there are, jobs available on the reservation, but also everywhere around that reservation. You're talking a couple hours from Jackson, right? The difference is from these world-class trout streams where you see 8 boats a day, or you're fishing shoulder to shoulder with somebody on the reservation and you don't see anyone. And the fish are bigger and dumber, and it's an amazing fishery. But what you have to do is you have to ensure that they have the skills to compete with all the other guides, right? And so we found this curriculum actually that was done in Bristol Bay. Bristol Bay has a native guide academy, and we worked with some people to adopt it to the Wind River Reservation. And so we did that right before COVID. Obviously, that became an issue, but that's getting ready to kick off again this fall. And so, yeah, the thought then is, how do we move those people in from that and help them get a job placement? There is a game code on the reservation, which is interesting. So, you take a step back. 30 years before the Wilderness Act, the tribes designated a wilderness area, right? So the idea of conservation and the ethic to protect their resources is there. And so, they have a game code that was written in the 80s, and that game code outlines, how the outfitting structure works. So there are, currently 3 outfitters on the reservation, 4 outfitters, I guess. Some of them take you from state side to state side, and you have to hire this one person to drive you, or to guide you through the reservation. There's some that are, there's a whitewater rafting and fly fishing, guy. His name's Darren Calhoun. People have probably heard of him. He's amazing. He has the Wind River Canyon, which is by far, in my naive opinion, the best fly fishing in the Western United States. He could easily put 10 boats a day on that stretch of water. He limits it to 2 because he doesn't want the pressure. And so, and then with the exception of him, who's been there for 30 years, there's a couple other ones who are somewhat newer. But point being, the game code stipulates that an outfitter has to be an enrolled member. So you have to be an enrolled member of one of the 2 tribes to hold an outfitting permit. Doesn't mean you have to hire guides that are enrolled members. And so if we can start filling those guide jobs with people from the reservation, one of the things that is unique to what we do is that, we focus on these 3 pillars of sustainability, and we've really talked about 2 of them, right? The environmental side, driven by science; the economic side, how do we create sustainable livelihoods through sustainable use of the resource? And then the third one is cultural, which is, how do we ensure that this culture remains relevant and is passed down and continued to pass down, and expanded even in some cases, so it's not lost, right? And so that, we're not the people to do that. That needs to be done by the elders in the community. But if we make it a priority, then, it can become a priority. And so one of the things that we found in places and destinations is, Rewa's a great example of this too, is the people that go on these trips likely fly fish all over the world, right? And the stories that they come home and tell at the dinner table with their family or at the bar with their buddies doesn't tend to be like, oh, I caught the biggest fish in my life, or, oh, I caught X number of fish over X number of days. It's like, man, I met this guy and this gal from this community and learned from them and was able to experience a completely different culture that I never even knew existed. And it was the coolest thing that ever happened to me. And so if you look at a place like Wind River, where you have, opportunities really close to you, what pulls people from Jackson to the reservation to fish, or anywhere else, right? We feel it's that immersive experience. So when you go to the reservation and you get guided by a white dude, you kind of lose some of that, right? And so, our goal is to fill as many of those jobs with enrolled members, but they got to have the skill set. That's a very long answer to your short question. I'm sorry.
Today's episode is sponsored by Fishhound Expeditions, putting together remote Alaskan wilderness trips for your trip of a lifetime. This is not your typical lodge-style trips. These are remote, float-in, remote trips where you're likely not going to see a heck of a lot of people except for some bears while you're mousing for rainbows, camping on the beach, just enjoying Alaska the way it should be enjoyed. In a recent episode that Adam was on, he shared his story and how he founded Fishhound after a lifelong passion and goal to get this going, and now it's great to see. So you can do this right now if you head over to wetflyswing.com/fishhound, and you can check out some of the trips Adam has going on, and we're going to be heading out there this fall. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check in with Adam or myself. Again, that's wetflyswing.com/fishhound, FISHHOUND, to support this podcast and a really amazing company. Okay, back to the show.
Yeah, this is great. No, I think the cultural thing, that wasn't I wasn't thinking as much about that. So I'm glad you touched on that. And I just want to give a shout out to, I've got a connection with a local Indigenous hip hop artist, Superman. So I always love to give a shout out to him because he's doing some cool things in kind of up in Montana. He talks about similar things, right? He raps about that and stuff. But yeah, it's you also get some pushback too, right? I'm sure you guys see it. I mean, I don't know when you're out around the world, there's challenges there, but I know you hear from people occasionally that maybe, they talk about this is a struggle, right? Obviously, we've kind of wiped out Indigenous communities in this country, and then you have people still kind of some of the bias, right? Some of that, and we don't have to dig into all that, but I would imagine that's a little bit of a challenge, like trying to get your word out there. Or just talk briefly about that. Is that a challenge for you guys, or when you go into these communities, once you build the trust of the community, is it easy to promote this around the country?
Great question. Look, again, the level of skepticism is rightfully high. We do take the time, as mentioned, to build relationships before we talk about doing projects. I think there are a couple things that make it easier on our end in the long run. One, like when I talk about developing relationships, I'm not talking about quid pro quo relationships here. I'm talking let's use Wind River as an example. Our biggest partner there is Tribal Fish and Game. So, it's one of the only or a handful of, intertribal programs. So, both tribes. The guy who runs that, the director is a guy named Art Lawson. He is, an amazing guy that has an impossible job, but I've never met anyone more, dedicated to making his homeland a better place for the future. I mean, it is truly inspiring. But he's become one of my best friends now, right? And so it's a real relationship. It's not a business relationship. And when we go into a community and say, look, when we get to this point finally, when you tell them, look, we're going to invite people down here to catch fish in the most inefficient way possible, and they're going to take a picture with them and let them go so somebody else can catch them, and you have the ability to have a business and make a fair amount of money from this and improve your lives. They look at you like you're crazy, right? Rightfully so. But one thing that we're really good at is persevering through all those things. And that's what it takes, is keeping, the constant showing up, the constant communication, the, authenticity. And, when we say we're going to do something, we do it. Right. And, that value system and structure, I guess, that Indifly has goes a long way in, if, a community has a project while we're there and they're redoing someone's house, or, they're chasing wild horses or whatever, we jump in and help. And so, that fully immersive thing, the sincerity, the vision, all of those things, I think, right, is eventually seen of and the other thing is just very simple. None of these projects work unless the community wants them. Again, these are 100% community-owned projects, right? There's nothing in it for us if they don't want it to work. And so that does take some time to get through people's heads as well. Just the simple fact of, almost everyone coming into these communities wants something out of this relationship. And, so it takes us some time to convince people, especially leadership, of like, look, this is an opportunity for you, not to only have like a community owned business, but really the model is this hub and spoke model of, say it's a lodge, that lodge that is built is the hub, right? But there are infinite smaller scale entrepreneurial activities that people can stand up from the community to service the people coming to the lodge, right? Somebody can sell their arts and crafts. Somebody can start a shuttle company. Somebody can start, raising chickens to sell Westerners eggs because they have to have eggs in the morning, right? All these different things. So, but that's a great question.
Yeah, it seems like obviously it's a challenge. It's like where we are, but it's cool to hear that you guys are digging in on this, and it sounds like you're here for the long term. Are there other areas? I'm not sure. Are there other areas around the world you guys are looking at as you look into the future? Do you have places in mind, or does that just come as you go?
Yeah, we do. We have quite a long list actually, but time and money. Dave.
Yeah.
We are a nonprofit, right? So, we run pretty lean and mean. And so, while our team is all passionate and go-getters, that only stretches so far. And then, the money thing, obviously, we have to have capital to do these things. But we do have a pretty long list. The other thing I guess I should say here is that we don't jump into new projects, on a whim. Like we do a lot of due diligence before we do that. And most importantly, we make sure our ability going into a new project doesn't diminish our ability to serve the communities that we've made commitments to.
That's right. And I think I mentioned Oliver White at the start. So is he still, I think, is he out in that area? I mean, give me a heads up on that because I'm not sure. I know that's where I thought there was the big connection, but it sounds like this is much bigger than just him. There's other people involved at kind of his level, right? As a guide, as a kind of a big influencer, right, out there. Is there other folks like Oliver White doing kind of promoting it at the same level?
Yeah. Yeah. We have a board and advisory council. Look, Oliver's key to this whole thing. He's been, in it since the beginning. He's our chairman, right? So definitely a big player. Geographically, he is pretty close to the Wind River Reservation. He's in Idaho, which is, just across the pass, as they say in Wyoming, which tends to be, 5 or 6 hours everywhere. But yeah. So, look, Oliver's key to this whole thing. And look, I don't, when you talk about leaders in this space, there are a few, but, Oliver's one of those guys, and I'm clearly biased here, that stands out, right? He really takes a different approach to what he does in that, he, constantly is trying to find ways to give back, right? And so I think that's admirable.
Yeah, that is. That's it was fun connecting. I actually saw met you at the IFTD and all over there in person for the first time was definitely cool. And that's how, this show came, this idea came to be, getting this out there. So no, this is great. And I want to just give an opportunity for those listening, if they want to dig in more, what can people do if they're kind of listening now? What do you recommend if there's either small or little, big or small things they can do? What do you tell people?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that people can do is, learn more, right? There's videos, there's the website, shoot us an email. Happy to answer any questions. If you feel compelled to get further engaged, we have this small dollar donor program called the Indifly Core. It's like our monthly sustainer program. You commit to $20 or more every month. That comes with some perks and benefits. You can tell your friends and family about Indifly.
Yep.
That's something simple. Awareness is always big for us. And the last thing I would say is go to one of these communities. That is a way to have an impact. Take a trip.
I love that. And that's exactly what, Like I said, I've got a couple connections, and we were just out there last summer in that area and didn't hit that area. And 2.3 million acres, just for those that don't realize, I mean, the largest wilderness area in the country, I guess more of the, in the U.S. is the Salmon River, right? There's like 2 million acres. So this is a whole nother, just because it's on tribal lands, is an equal size. So we're talking about literally one of the largest areas in the country. Is that kind of the way you guys look at it?
Yeah, I mean, look, not all of that is a designated wilderness area, right?
Right.
Or a roadless area. But yeah, your 2.3 million acres, it takes you 12 hours probably to drive across, right? I mean, it's
Wow.
and look, some of that is the terrain of Wyoming.
Sure.
You can't go in a straight line, but it is, yeah, it's a big, vast, amazing place. And I will say too, just on the Wind River thing, so anyone can go fish, guided or unguided, with a fishing license, a travel fishing license, which you can now buy online, right? And so, while I highly, highly, highly encourage you to hire a guide because it is so vast and they can take you to places that you can't get to on your own. If you're driving through, go online, make sure you buy that permit, and stop and wet a line.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that tip because that's those, obviously people listening are into, fly fishing. So you can go in there and what would be your recommendation if you wanted to do that on your own? And, obviously getting a guide would be better, but say you did it on your own, how could you get information on where to fish? Is there some information out there on kind of all that stuff?
Yeah. So if you go to, the Wind River Fishing Game website, which I believe is, and maybe you want to, fact check this, but I believe it's just windriverfishinggame.com. There is, a section you can buy your permit, but there's also a section that lists the regs, what's open when, all of those things. So, you're talking about vertical terrain as well. So, you unless you have days and days to hike, you're unlikely to do a quick trip and get to a golden trout area. But there's a great chance of pulling out a 20-inch brown trout in certain places on that reservation pretty regularly. So, it's worth a stop.
Yeah, this sounds amazing because like you mentioned, you're so close to some of those other areas, the Jackson, and where it's like, sometimes feels like, there's a lot of people, right? Shoulder to shoulder, boats everywhere, but you're talking about a place you can still go. And obviously it's regulated, so we're not going to like put too many people on any place, but that's good to hear. You know what I mean? Like for me, when I think of looking out, it seems like, gosh, I can actually maybe support the local Indigenous community and have some fun fishing, right? Have a good time out. That sounds like a kind of a win-win. And you guys are promoting that, right? Do you feel that when you look in the future, does that still look like a challenge to you where maybe it gets too much pressure down the line, or is that something you guys are going to be monitoring?
Yeah, a couple things there. That is our constant fear, right? You have seen this increase in license sales on the reservation over the COVID boom, right? As more people got outdoors and were introduced to fly fishing and all these things, which right now is great. Again, they have a trust relationship with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who has an amazing team of a couple guys there, who are tracking the pressure type stuff. But our constant fear in these things is finding, or I guess what we try to balance is finding the right mix of awareness and people going to make an impact. And, that impact is economic in this case is what I'm speaking of. At the same time of keeping these places pristine. We don't want, 8 people on a stretch of water. We don't want, the populations to feel too much pressure and degrade the fishery, all these things. Right. But at the same time, you got 80% unemployment. And one of the funny things that I find funny anyway, I'm sure some people do not, is, you talk to people about the reservation and they have this visceral reaction of me telling people about their honey hole. And I'm like, look, man, this isn't even your land. Like, there's 80% unemployment on this reservation. Let's solve that issue before you worry about losing your honey hole, right? The other thing is, one of the things that we need to solve is the economic leakage problem. So we have a team of socioeconomists that kind of look at this stuff, and they're much smarter than I am. But if you go to the reservation and fish, and you want to contribute economically by filling up your gas tank, or going out to eat, or finding a place to stay, or whatever, right? Oftentimes those things are done in the border towns. And so how can we keep as many dollars as possible leaking from the reservation? And so, as people travel through, right, for whatever reason, if you go from, say east to west and you're going to Yellowstone, the GPS units, or, Google Maps or whatever, Apple Maps on your phone now, they divert you around the entire reservation, right?
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, how do we get people to come down the middle of the reservation?
Right. That's
So,
crazy.
it's all those multifaceted challenges. But the back to your point is, that's something that we constantly struggle with is, how do we make an impact without, overstepping and having this place just become.
That's the thing, is that you guys are promoting it, and you look at some of these other places, like you mentioned, the Guyana, and that's a unique people, right? There's a certain amount of people that can do that trip, but Wyoming is right in the middle of the country, right, or the West, whatever, and people can drive right through, and you could see that if you promoted it a bunch, I could see how that could be become a very busy place. But I'm sure, you guys are on track to monitor that. And yeah, it's interesting. This is so you've got this now, and then for you, are you actually out in the where are you at now physically?
Yeah, so I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, the frozen tundra. I married a girl from Minnesota, so we moved back here like 8 years ago to raise our family.
Cool. Has it unfrozen? I know we had a late season there. Is it still frozen there?
Thankfully not. I mean, we didn't really have much of a spring. I feel like it went from 50s to 90s overnight, but it's hot here today. So
there you go. Awesome. Well, I got a couple of random ones, then we'll get out of here. And one of them, I think, was sharks in your background. Do you have an experience, the connection there to some work with sharks?
Yeah.
Cool. Before, I just want to tee that up. So last night we were. Jacques Cousteau has been coming up a lot on this podcast for people, like big influences. Last night we watched I think it was one of his later films. But man, you look at that stuff and you're like, wow, it's just, it was impressive back in the day, what he put together. And it reminded me again, right, sharks and all these animals out there. So is that, talk about that. I'm just curious on your end. Did sharks, was it that before you got into Indifly?
It was, yeah. And that really became out of with a buddy, who always had a fascination with the ocean, and it was kind of when shark finning became a big thing, right? So you had a rise in the Asian economy, and more people able to afford nice things, and culturally, shark fin soup is of great importance. This is a bad analogy, but it's the one that I used to use all the time. It's kind of like wedding cake. It's one of those things that when people have a nice function, they serve shark fin soup there, right? And I will say, I'm going to preface this with, the shark fin thing has become much less of a problem thanks to larger organizations doing really important work from the bottom up to change the perception of shark fin soup, right? So or shark finning, period.
The bottom up, kind of like Indifly is doing.
Exactly, yeah. And this organization was called OSearch. OSearch did a bunch of that too. But the thing is that there was this very large void in data around sharks. So like the whole model was, how do you study an apex predator of the ocean? The only way you did so is when it washed up dead on the beach, and then that data was kind of kept to people's selves so they could do whatever with it. I'm not going to go into the nuances, but we wanted to do two things. We wanted to figure out how you could study one of these things live and, keep them safe. And we wanted to change the public perception of, Jaws, right?
Yeah.
You talk about sharks being an apex predator of the ocean. What happens when, they're over harvested and start to decline in population, right? It's any ecosystem. Other things thrive, and that can have a negative benefit and all these things. And so, it was a really interesting world, and was really lucky to be part of it.
Right on. Well, and I guess in the next kind of what are we at here? We're kind of going into like July, August, in the summer. As you look out over the next year or so, how does it look for Indifly? Do you have what's your next big thing? Do you have something there that you can kind of give a heads up on coming up?
Yeah, for sure. So, we're coming back online from COVID, and really when I say we, it means the communities. REWA is, back doing trips. They've done 2 sessions, so they have 2 seasons basically a year, and it's gone really, really well. And the cool thing, just as a side note, the whole Indifly model is for us to step back, right? And have it be 100% community operated. And REWA is there, man. And it's so cool to watch. When we first went to REWA, their only form of communication was a shortwave radio that reached the next village. And, eventually that got to, a large town, and they could communicate that way. But now, they have a website, and the lodge manager has a cell phone that doesn't call anybody, but he can answer client emails from a satellite internet connection. And, they've used the funds from the profits of the fishing operation to, invest in education and health and, do all these amazing things, all because people like to go down there and fish. But you're talking about, a group of people who are running this business, and something that we didn't talk about today is the actual business side, right? Like the whiteboard accounting sessions in the beginning. They're fully functional on their own. And we'll be around as long as they need us and want us. But it's really cool to watch them be autonomous, if you will.
God, that is amazing.
So, what that allows us to do is, deploy those resources to other things, right? So Anna's coming back online. But Wind River is going to be pretty big this summer. So we're kicking off the Native Guide Academy. We're doing a couple other things in terms of films and things like that. Then we have a couple other like the social impact projects that I spoke of that we'll announce soon. And then really it's what's the next big community that we can do and how can we operate? But first we want to ensure that we can fulfill our commitment to our other partners. A big part of that this year will be kicking off a fundraising drive to build the lodge on the reservation. So, people can get involved that way as well.
There you go. So right now there actually isn't a lodge where people can kind of, as we know it, right, go to a lodge and stay.
That's right. And it goes back to, there are a couple that are owned by, some outfitters that are small. This is just a supplement to them. We're not in competition with those outfitters. It's just, another arrow in their quiver, if you will. But again, it goes back to that. How do we keep dollars on the reservation?
That's it. Awesome, Matt. Well, I'll leave it there for the day, and definitely keep in touch with you, and hopefully I can make it up there. We'll send everybody out to indifly.org, and if they want to connect. And yeah, man, thanks for shedding some light on this today. It's I've been, like I said at the start, I've been wanting to hear about the story for a while, and I'm glad to hear you guys are still rolling along. And yeah, until we talk, catch you later.
Appreciate the opportunity, sir. Thanks.
So there it is. You can head over to wetflyswing.com/342. 342 will get you the links and some videos and whatever else I can come up with here on this episode to shed a little more light on this. We got a listener shout out and a past sponsor shout out. Mark at Tyrite reached out to me recently and let me know he really enjoyed the Henry Winkler episode. So just want to give a shout out, Mark. Glad to see you and good to connect with you at the last show. Great to see you're still running the show at Tyrite. Things are going good there, and I appreciate you for listening to that episode. That was the Henry Winkler, the Fawns, the story. One of my definitely is going to go down as one of the big episodes. So if you want to connect with me and get a shout out here, you can send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, or check with me on social media, and we could put it together. Reminder before we get out of here, Travel Time. This is their new segment where we're going to be slowly traveling based on flight availability and maybe some other things, costs potentially. But we're going to be mixing this up and flying around, maybe driving around, hopefully too. We'll see how it works out. But wherever we get an opportunity to connect with somebody, I want to be choosing a couple winners this year to head out to your hometown and find a local guide and go do some fishing. And we also have this little co-hosted opportunity. So if you're interested in also being a co-host on this show, this is your opportunity. So wetflyswing.com/travel time. That's TRAVEL time, travel time. That's our way for you to connect with us on a little mini travel excursion. That's all I have for you today. Hope you are having a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Appreciate your support and Appreciate your support, and I hope to connect with you online or maybe even on the water.